The justice system is a complex maze, designed by experts to be navigated by experts. It is a game with its own rules, where the average citizen is always at a disadvantage. But what happens when one man, stripped of everything, with nothing but time, decides to learn the rules of the game? This is the story of how the most powerful weapon in the fight for freedom was not evidence, but knowledge itself. Guilty. The word spoken by the judge hung in the air of the courtroom before falling on Arthur like a slab of concrete. He felt the breath leave his body. Around him the world moved in slow motion. His mother's suppressed sobs, the prosecutor's satisfied look, his own defense attorney, a young, overwhelmed man who simply shrugged his shoulders in a gesture of helpless resignation. Arthur barely heard the rest of the sentence. Life in prison. His life as he knew it had ended there, under the cold lights of a system he did not understand. The first few years at the state penitentiary were an exercise in self-denial. The Arthur who existed on the outside, the mechanic, the father, the friend, was systematically dismantled. All that remained was the number on his uniform, a shadow that learned to walk with its head down, to avoid making eye contact, to become invisible in order to survive. The environment was predatory. The smell of metal, sweat, and disinfectant. The constant noise, a hum of hundreds of desperate lives echoing in the concrete hallways. The violence was sudden and senseless. Hope was a disease few could afford to contract. It was in this abyss that he met Carlos, his cellmate in the early days. Carlos was a portrait of the system. Arrested for a minor crime, his sentence was extended due to bureaucratic errors. He talked constantly about his public defender, a man he saw once a year for 10 minutes. He'll get an appeal, Carlos would say, with a faith that diminished with each postponed hearing. Arthur saw in Carlos the fate of everyone. There, a lifetime of waiting, trusting in a system that had neither the time nor the resources to care. Carlos's hope was a flickering candle in a windy corridor, and Arthur watched with cold sadness as it went out. Watching Carlos's spirit slowly wither away was the catalyst. Arthur realized that hoping for salvation was just a slower way of giving up. He needed something, anything, to keep his own mind from dissolving into emptiness. That was when he discovered the library. It was not a prestigious place. It was a forgotten room in the back of a pavilion, a repository of donated paperback novels and outdated encyclopedias. But in a corner, behind a rusty metal bookcase, he found a small collection covered in a thick layer of dust. Law books, penal codes from the 1980s, manuals of procedure, treatises on jurisprudence. He picked up the first book, a heavy volume on criminal procedural law. At first, words were an insurmountable barrier, an arcane language designed to exclude, but Arthur had something no lawyer on the outside had in abundance: time. Infinite, uninterrupted time. He began to read, an old dictionary at his side. He read each page 3, 4, 5 times. He copied terms onto scraps of cardboard. His cell, once a symbol of his confinement, became a study. The pursuit of knowledge became his new raison d'être. It was an obsession. The next few years were a complete immersion. Arthur became a strange figure in the prison, the man who would not go out into the yard, who would trade his food for more time in the library, who could be seen muttering articles of the penal code to himself. The other prisoners left him alone. Some thought he had gone mad. Others, more discerning, saw an intensity in his gaze that they saw in no one else. He was no longer just surviving. He was hunting. After 5 years of self-study, he finally had access to a complete copy of his own case file. It was thousands of pages long, a testament to his conviction. With shaking hands, he began to read. But this time he was not reading like a victim reliving his trauma. He was reading like a defense attorney looking for a flaw. And he found it. Let's look at this artifact. Page 147 of the trial transcript. It's the testimony of the key eyewitness. Arthur's lawyer at the time asked only 3 formal questions, but here, in Arthur's marginal notes, we see the mind of a strategist at work. He circled a sentence. I saw his car pulling out of the street. Next to it, he wrote, contradiction. Police report on page 32 states the street was blocked for construction, no way out that way. He listed 17 such inconsistencies, but the key discovery comes in a footnote, where he cites the 1982 case Estado versus Almeida, an obscure legal precedent about invalidating testimony based on tainted memory at the suggestion of the media, a detail that 3 professional lawyers before him had missed. This was no longer the diary of a desperate man. It was a lawyer's brief. Arthur's reputation spread. He became the Cell 7 lawyer. Inmates who had been abandoned by their public defenders began to seek him out. With a Bic pen and lined paper, he drafted habeas corpus petitions, requests for review, appeals. He could not sign the documents, but he taught the other men how to argue, how to cite the law, how to fight with the only weapon the system was obliged to respect. He created a small law practice in the heart of despair, and for the first time, he gave forgotten men a voice. Some of his petitions, to the shock of the justice system, were successful. Small victories, sentence reductions, new trials. Each was a brick in the construction of his own hope. Finally, after nearly a decade of study, he felt ready. He spent 6 months writing his own appeal. It was a 200-page document, handwritten in impeccable calligraphy. A masterpiece of legal logic, citing dozens of precedents and exposing irrefutably the grotesque flaws in his own judgment. He submitted it without warrant to the state appeals court. The document landed on the desk of a veteran judge, a woman known for her rigor and skepticism. She picked it up, expecting yet another desperate, poorly written plea. But as she began to read, her expression changed. She saw the logic, the research, the sophisticated argumentation. Shocked to discover that the author was the prisoner himself, she did something she rarely did. She assigned a special investigator to re-examine the original case. The climax of Arthur's journey was not in a prison yard, but back where it all began, the courtroom. His appeal hearing had been granted, and in an unprecedented move, the judge allowed him to act as co-counsel in his own defense. When Arthur stood to speak, the silence in the room was absolute. He was no longer the frightened young man he had been all those years ago. He was a middle-aged man, his face lined with the hardships of life, but his eyes shone with an unwavering clarity. He did not shout. He did not make emotional appeals. With surgical calm, he spoke the language of the system. He cited laws, dismantled the witness's testimony, pointed out the flaws in the expert analysis, and finally presented the precedent of the Almeida case. He was not asking for mercy. He was demanding the correct application of the law. The prosecutors, unprepared for such a high-level attack from the defendant himself, stuttered. The system, for the first time, was being judged by one of its own victims. The mistrial was swift. The judge, as she handed down her decision, looked directly at Arthur and said, "You are a credit to the profession that you never had the chance to practice." The word "not guilty" rang out through the courtroom. The handcuffs were removed. After 13 years, 4 months, and 12 days, Arthur was free. The scene as he walked out of the prison gates was silent. He did not run. He simply stood, looked up at the blue sky, a sky that he had only seen through bars, and took a deep breath of the air of freedom. Arthur's story didn't end there. Inspired by his journey, he graduated from law school, passed the bar exam, and became what he already was in spirit, a lawyer. Today, he doesn't defend corporations. He doesn't seek wealth. He dedicates his life to one type of client, the forgotten man, the hopeless case, the Arthur he once was. Prison was designed to be the end of his story, a place to crush his spirit and erase his name. But in one of the greatest ironies of justice, it was in the most desolate place on earth that he found the most powerful tool for his liberation. He proved that bars can imprison a body, but they cannot contain a determined mind, and that sometimes the key to unlocking the cage door is hidden in the jailer's own library.